warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learned from a book or from the news. It's not like that, cause it's a thing. It is something that you do.
Bassline, everyone. Dr. William Makis is a radiologist, an oncologist, and a doctor of nuclear medicine. He's gone from being a prolific scholar with over 100 peer-reviewed papers to his name to now being a prolific journalist, keeping track of sudden deaths, excess mortality, and the wide range of health problems being witnessed, which all seem causally related to the inoculations that were rolled out at the end of 2020. His Substack is a must-subscribe for all medical freedom warriors. Get ready for a treat, everyone. We are about to cover a wide range of subjects with the brilliant and prolific Dr. William Makis. How are you today, Dr. Makis? Welcome to the Bassline.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk with you. I've been listening to your interviews all week, and good gracious, you are a knowledgeable man, my friend. I'm really looking forward to asking you some questions here. Before I forget, I'm sorry, I just have to plug for our listeners. You know I'm a musician, and today is Bandcamp Friday. That means if you support my music, if you go to jeremiahhosea.com and buy a song, all the money goes to me, and I don't have to share the money with a third-party corporation. And I'd greatly appreciate that because, yes, I do have 2 children to feed, and yes, this is a labor of love, and I do take the time to produce this program and bring you incredible guests like the guests we're featuring today. So my first question, Dr. Makis, and this is a broad question. We're kind of starting in a massive way, and then we'll work our way into some of the details. But my question is, at this point, considering what appears to me to be an avalanche of injury and death, how are the excess deaths being concealed? Because it seems to me that we clearly have a problem by many metrics, and there's a really strong effort, a detailed effort to try to cover all this up and sweep it under the rug. How are they going about doing that? How are they succeeding in concealing this avalanche of injury and death?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's really a tsunami of injuries, disabilities, and deaths. Now, we're seeing excess deaths in all the highly COVID-vaccinated countries. United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Germany. Every country that has had, a vaccine uptake of 85% for the first 2 doses and then booster uptake of 50 or 60%, each of these countries are seeing very high excess mortality since the COVID vaccines rolled out. Now, they are admitting to the excess deaths. So, for example, the Canadian government has just admitted that in 2022, 49,000 additional Canadians died compared to 2019. So they're admitting the excess mortality. You're seeing, for example, in the United Kingdom, the BBC admits tens of thousands of excess deaths in the UK. The Australian media admits tens of thousands of excess deaths. You can see the excess deaths in the United States as well in the hundreds of thousands. So they're admitting the excess deaths, but what they're lying about is the cause. They're lying about the cause, and I believe where they're playing with the data is what causes they're attributing these deaths to. And so a lot of deaths are still being attributed to COVID-19, which I believe is a complete fraud. We're seeing it in Canada as well. In fact, last year, the Canadian government reported 19,000 COVID deaths compared to 2020 when we had 15,000 COVID deaths, and yet we are 7 or 8 COVID vaccines in. So we shouldn't be seeing so many COVID-19 deaths. And yet the government claims that, we continue to have this high death rate from COVID-19, despite the fact that the COVID has become mild. Omicron is much milder than, the original strains. The government has recommended, I think the Canadian government has recommended 7 COVID vaccines up to now. So I believe they're hiding COVID vaccine deaths as COVID deaths. That's one area where they're hiding it. And then, they're spreading out the mortality between other various causes. Now, they talked about missed appointments, canceled doctor's appointments, missed cancer screenings. They're admitting to an increase in cardiac deaths, but they're saying it's from climate change or it's from, gardening or showering with cold water or whatever nonsense. You always see these news stories.
Whistle.
The referee's whistle, exactly.
Winter vagina.
Listening to loud music. Whatever the ridiculous excuse is. I think there was a Malaysian actress that died of a cardiac arrest, and they blamed, she was blow drying her hair, and so they blamed it on that.
Wow, they've said people have died of joy. Someone got a perfect score on their exam and dropped dead right there from joy.
Exactly. So we're seeing, ridiculous excuses. For the doctors, they're often blaming long COVID, and they'll say, well, you might have had a mild COVID infection 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but now you died suddenly because of whatever reason. We're blaming long COVID for it. So they're trying to spread around the excess mortality, and it's basically anything but the vaccine.
And could I add to your statement a little bit, Doctor? Which is, It seems to me that there's an obvious, bailout, or in terms of not pointing to the vaccines, where you have elderly people who, if someone's 80 and they die suddenly, well, maybe they were going to live till they were 88 or they were 90. But anyone who's really above, the age of 60, we say, oh, well, no one lasts forever. Life is mysterious. You never know when you're going to go, that kind of thing. And likewise, when people have long-term health problems, like maybe they've suffered from diabetes for a good period of time, then we say, oh, well, they had diabetes. But meanwhile, they had lived with their diabetes, and it suddenly became a fatal condition after vaccination. But those are two groups, both the elderly and people with significant pre-existing conditions who they possibly have died prematurely from their injection, but it's completely written off on the grounds of their age or pre-existing condition. Isn't that fair to say?
Well, that's absolutely correct. And you will see a lot of these deaths labeled as natural causes, died from natural causes. And it's one of the reasons I don't really report on sudden deaths of anyone above the age of 60 is because no one looks at these deaths. No one seems to care. And like you said, people will assume that, well, this person was going to die anyways. Well, maybe they had another 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years of life left, and their life was shortened by the COVID vaccines. So this is how these excess deaths are being, the causes are being hidden, or the causes are being there's misdirection in the way these deaths are being labeled. Now, again, so we look at the excess mortality, and that is our best estimate as to how many people have died from the COVID vaccines. They're not all going to be deaths caused by the vaccine, but I believe the majority of these deaths have been caused by the COVID vaccine. So when you look at just the excess mortality, how many people died in 2021 or 2022 compared to 2019 or 2020, you can get a good idea of just the scale of the carnage that these COVID vaccines are causing.
Yes, it's really terrifying. And isn't it fair to say, before I get officially into our second question, I would like to ask you that, isn't it fair to say, irrespective of the amount of injury that is being inflicted by these shots, that the excess mortality, at the very least, is an indication that it's not an effective medical product to begin with, before we get into all the carnage, right? I mean, how can you claim that these are effective? Well, when excess death goes up in the entire society, not an effective implementation, wouldn't you say?
Well, exactly. We shouldn't be seeing excess mortality, and there's certainly no other plausible explanation. To say that, well, there's been increased stress during the pandemic, or there's been increased, drinking or suicides. I mean, yes, those are, very minor contributions to an increased mortality, but it certainly doesn't explain the vast majority of it. And even when you look at COVID deaths, we shouldn't be having more COVID deaths. We should be having far fewer COVID deaths now that the vaccines have been rolled out. I mean, how are the vaccines 95% effective? How are they reducing severity of illness and death when we have more COVID deaths than ever before, and they keep rolling out booster shot after booster shot? So it's clear that, at the very least, these vaccines are not helping in any way whatsoever, but, there is a lot of evidence that these vaccines are actually causing harm, and they're causing injuries and deaths in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more.
Right. So let's get into your particular area of expertise, which is you're a cancer specialist, correct?
Yes.
And we've heard reports of turbo cancer in association with the vaccines, the novel gene-based, I hate to call them vaccines, I like to refer to them as products that were falsely marketed as vaccines. But in regard to these injections, Dr. Ryan Cole warned in the beginning that these shots would deregulate the immune system, which would lead to an uptick in cancers, and other specialists made similar warnings. And now it seems that this is playing out. And without getting into a bunch of anecdotes, I do know of a couple of individuals who are relatively young who suddenly have cancer after receiving their injections. I've heard of individuals who had exactly what was described as turbo cancer in terms of something that appears as a stage 4 cancer and then quickly takes a person's life almost as soon as they're diagnosed. They're dead without even any attempt at treatment. I've seen some of these examples in my own everyday life. Now, my question to you is, I guess, sort of similar to the first question, is what do you say to people, and I've heard more than one person make this claim, that anyone who makes a reference to turbo cancer, that's a bunch of nonsense, that is an anti-vax trope, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, before you answer, I'll just say, I find it pretty arrogant to speak for the entire world of oncology. Like, how would you say that something is absolutely false unless you've talked to every oncologist, right? Unless you're really aware of what you're saying, you shouldn't make some sweeping declaration that something isn't true. But from your professional and clinical experience, what have you seen? What can you convey to the audience in terms of the reality of these cancers you've observed?
Well, I can tell you my specialization is nuclear medicine, radiology, and oncology. I'm board certified through a 5-year specialization program after medical school. I've diagnosed about over 20,000 cancer patients in my career with cutting-edge PET-CT scans and other nuclear medicine scans. And I've treated several hundred cancer patients as a primary oncologist, and I've published over 100 publications, most of them in cancer. So I have expertise in cancer, and I've been basically reporting on what I see, and what I see is an explosion of cancers in young people, the types of cancers we shouldn't be seeing in young people, and the behavior of these cancers is unlike anything I've ever seen. They're presenting at a late stage, usually stage 4, sometimes stage 3, usually stage 4. They grow very rapidly. They metastasize very aggressively. And oncologists are struggling with these cancers. They try to treat them. They try to put people on the standard chemotherapy, radiation therapy, even some brand new immunotherapy regimens. And usually these cancers don't respond. That is one of the fascinating things about this, is that these aggressive cancers in vaccinated people, they're not responding to conventional treatments. And you can see these stories. Now, where am I seeing these stories? We're not getting these stories from the oncologists, most of whom are simply not publishing these cases. There's been a few publications, like cases on turbo cancer. I think there's been about a dozen or so. Dr. Peter McCullough actually published the most recent one. But we're not getting these stories from oncologists. We're getting these stories from the cancer patients themselves. And this is crucial. The cancer patients themselves are telling us about these cancers. And they don't know. Some of them don't link it to the vaccine. Some of them don't understand what's going on. But they tell us about their cancer journey. Usually they will tell us on social media, or they will tell us on Facebook groups or GoFundMe fundraisers, and they will give their whole story. And they tell us that their oncologist has never seen this before. Their oncologist has never seen this kind of rapid growth of the tumor, or the aggressive spread, or the failure to respond to treatment. You have cancers that are supposed to, 95% of them are supposed to respond to a particular chemotherapy regimen, and they're not responding at all. And then the prognosis is extremely poor. These unfortunate individuals, the prognosis in most cases is less than a year. I would say typically 6 to 12 months after diagnosis. But in the cases of the really aggressive ones, the brain cancers or the leukemias, you could have diagnosis to death being a matter of weeks, days, and sometimes even hours. After diagnosis, the person dies. So the prognosis is extremely poor. And again, this is something that the mainstream medicine is completely ignoring. They don't want to look at this. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to acknowledge a possible link with the COVID vaccines. And I'm seeing these cancers in people who've had COVID vaccines. I'm not seeing it in people who are unvaccinated. This is a brand new phenomenon. It's happening in people who've had at least one COVID vaccine. It's happening with people who've had Pfizer or Moderna. We don't know yet about AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson because not a lot of people have had those vaccines in North America. And unfortunately, the people who did have, let's say, AstraZeneca or even Johnson & Johnson, sometimes they mixed and matched vaccines. So they ended up having Pfizer vaccines after because they couldn't travel because the country wouldn't recognize their AstraZeneca vaccine. So it becomes complicated. We don't know if the AstraZeneca and J&J are causing these cancers as well. But it's definitely happening in people who've had mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. You've just mentioned, cases. I have cases in my extended family circle and friends that I know, coworkers. It's happening to thousands and thousands of people. To deny that this is happening is really to deny reality.
I would say so. I mean, it's just, it's very apparent to me. I mean, in terms of what I've witnessed, I mean, I could literally sit here for the rest of the show and tell you just a bunch of really odd stories pertaining to people's health. I mean, husband and wife sitting there watching television, and suddenly the woman is noticing something strange in her vision. Her vision is blurry. Something's wrong. Winds up going to the hospital. They say, you have a detached retina. What do you mean I have a detached retina? I was just sitting there watching television. Wasn't involved in mixed martial arts fighting or playing tackle football or anything like that. And then you see there's actually a peer-reviewed paper, COVID vaccinations linked to ocular degeneration. Hearing about someone, healthy person prior to this, someone into fitness and eating well and all that stuff, kidney disease out of nowhere. I know of, again, I'm a musician. I know of two, not just guitar players, two world-class guitar players with heart conditions out of nowhere. So add all of this up. I think it's a where there's smoke, there's fire situation. And I think there's a long history that people should be aware of in terms of class action lawsuits, in terms of products that were harmful for decades. And it wasn't proven in a court of law for literally decades that, yes, indeed, harm was inflicted. So that's where I feel we are right now is we already know extraordinary harm is being done, and the sooner we can stop this train, the better. Let's not wait decades to start acknowledging this. Let's start addressing it now, which takes me, actually, before I get to the question of the vaccine injured, because I would like to know if you've been involved in any support groups around that in terms of helping the vaccine injured, I wanted you to mention the Substack you released this morning, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of these vaccinations also linked to psychosis. I've heard of that, but didn't you just produce an article referencing that?
Yes. So there was a new paper that had just come out from Singapore reporting a case of a young person, I think it was in his 40s, with no past medical or psychiatric history, who had 3 Pfizer vaccines and then recently had taken the bivalent Moderna booster shot, and then developed a full-blown psychotic episode with manic features. Now, it's interesting because when I talk about mental health changes following COVID vaccination, I get huge pushback, and the pushback I get is that, again, it's I'm making things up, but where I really am very concerned is the area of suicide, attempted suicide, and suicide in people who've had the COVID vaccines. And I have seen skyrocketing suicides in vaccinated Canadian doctors who were forced to take the vaccines to keep their jobs. They were forced to have a minimum of 2 vaccines. Most of them have been pressured by their hospital administrators to take, 6, 7 shots by now. And you could see just a skyrocketing suicide rate in Canadian doctors. And I was viciously attacked on this because, usually the detractors will say, well, you're just exploiting a tragedy for your own agenda. Well, there is no agenda. I am seeing this pattern in all the vaccinated professions, not just doctors, but I'm seeing suicides in nurses, in teachers, in the military, police officers, firefighters, anywhere where these vaccines were mandated for people to keep their jobs. This is happening. And what's interesting is that there are many cases now reported in the literature, published, peer-reviewed literature, of vaccines causing very serious mental health changes, whether it's, new depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, but full-blown psychosis with visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, hallucinations telling people to kill themselves, and then some of these people actually end up trying to commit suicide. And again, this is something that's not talked about. We know about some of the neurological injuries that the vaccines cause, the Bell's palsy and the multiple sclerosis, and some of the other, strokes, of course, brain bleeds, brain aneurysms, but people are not talking about mental health changes. And this is pretty well documented in the literature. It's also well documented in the VAERS reporting system. There are, I did another article on kids that had COVID vaccines and had, again, psychotic episodes and then attempted suicide shortly after taking these mRNA vaccines. So, this is another area that's rarely talked about, but very problematic. And neurological injuries and mental health changes, I think that's a huge category of injury that we're going to be seeing over the coming years. I think the 2 big categories are cancer and neurological problems. Things like neurodegenerative diseases, early dementia, more and more cases of that are showing up, and just all sorts of neurological problems.
Right. Now, I make it perfectly clear, I am not a doctor. I have no medical expertise or training whatsoever. I am a layperson who brings experts onto this program to discuss these matters in an effort to educate myself as well as the listening public. So I'm going on a limb here. I'm going to use one of my technical terms and ask you, what is the mechanism by which this psychosis could happen. Could this be related to thrombosis? Could there be some sort of permeating of the blood-brain barrier which triggers a mechanism in the brain? Or is that venturing too far afield to say something like that?
No, not at all. And I think a good way to describe what's happening in the vast majority of injuries is it's the lipid nanoparticle that delivers the mRNA. And now we know that there's DNA contamination as well in these vaccines. In all the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine vials, they've discovered DNA contamination as well. And that gets into the lipid nanoparticle as well. But these lipid nanoparticles, we've been told that, you get the injection in the arm, it stays in the arm, it makes spike protein, teaches your immune system how to recognize the spike protein so that if you encounter COVID in the future, your immune system is primed to respond to it quickly. And that's the idea behind this so-called vaccine. Now, that idea is a lie, and it was a very blatant lie from the beginning, because the Pfizer's own biodistribution studies show that about 75% of the injection ends up in the bloodstream after several hours. So this stuff doesn't stay in your arm. It actually ends up in your blood. And once it ends up in your blood, these lipid nanoparticles go everywhere. And they cross the blood-brain barrier very easily, just by the nature of the lipid nanoparticle itself. So they end up in the brain. The lipid nanoparticles end up accumulating in the brain. They get taken up by various types of brain cells. Then you get expression of abnormal proteins, like the spike protein, in the brain, causes all kinds of inflammatory processes, abnormal inflammatory processes. And that affects the brain tissue, and it affects it in various ways. And of course, depending on where this inflammation is happening and to what extent, that's why we're seeing all kinds of neurological processes and neurological injuries. And when you look at the literature of this, whether it's vision problems, whether it's vertigo, tinnitus, hearing problems, all the different kinds of neurodegenerative processes, demyelinating processes, the authors, when they publish these cases associated with the COVID vaccines, their number one theory on what's causing it is abnormal inflammation, aberration of the inflammatory response. And so, this is, it's unfortunate, but it is the nature of the lipid nanoparticles that end up in the bloodstream and, cross the blood-brain barrier. And that's unfortunately what's happening. And why this mRNA platform should be suspended, one of the many reasons it should be suspended, but the entire platform with the lipid nanoparticles is that, the lipid nanoparticles, you can't control where they go. They go everywhere. And so they cross the placenta, they end up in the fetus, for example. That's why you shouldn't be vaccinating pregnant women with this stuff, because some of it ends up in the baby, in the fetus. And we see miscarriages and stillbirths, and we see, growth restriction of the fetus. And, they end up in the brain. And again, that's not being, talked about very much, but that is the problem with this technology.
Right. I mean, it seems that you have something that's on the books and established as dangerous, which is mRNA. And then you take something else that's also established on the books as dangerous, which is the lipid nanoparticle delivery system, roll it into one, and then say, hey, let's use the global public as a dumping ground for proven dangerous technologies.
Well, I would say, I would actually go as far as to say they were failed technologies.
Failed.
They were failed technologies. They, they tried to use it in cancer patients. That's actually, I can tell you, that is the reason why I avoided these vaccines like the plague. Because I knew that they had tinkered with this technology in cancer. They could never figure out how to use it.
It wasn't ready for prime time at any point.
It was never ready. And in fact, what's shocking, what most people don't know, is that this technology was considered unsafe to use in end-stage cancer patients because the problems simply outweighed any possible benefits. Well, they couldn't get it to work. And of course, it was only causing problems for cancer patients. And yet, they roll this out in healthy people and billions of healthy people worldwide. That is just the disgusting nature of this. What they've done is they took a failed drug or a failed, pharmaceutical product, and they kind of repackaged it and remarketed it and rolled it out in the entire population.
Oh, my goodness. It's such a nightmare. Now, you actually reminded me of something that I intended to ask you about, and it ties into what we're discussing right this moment in terms of the effects on our human race. There's this issue, as you mentioned, of DNA plasmid contamination. We had Dr. Jessica Rose on this program discussing that in detail right as that was revealed by, I think, Dr. Buchholz, if I'm saying his name correctly.
He confirmed. It was discovered by Kevin McKernan, geneticist.
And he confirmed it.
Buchholz did. And then confirmed by Philip Buchholz, yeah.
Right, exactly. So my question in regard to this DNA stuff right now, they said, RNA is just the messaging system of DNA. That doesn't mess with your DNA to get an RNA injection. And of course, that was another conspiracy theorist thing, that a gene shot might affect your genes in a significant way. And now we have this issue of plasmid contamination. We have, I believe, a separate issue of the framing and the issue of junk proteins being produced by the body in reaction to mRNA injections. We have a range of gene-based issues and questions that are now officially on the table. But it feels to me, and tell me if this is a good analogy or not, Doctor. Again, I'm a lay person struggling to understand this complicated material. But it feels like a horror movie, like we're approaching a haunted house and we know something is definitely bad inside and we haven't opened the door yet. What do we know about the harm that we might have done to ourselves genetically as a human race? I mean, I don't mean to be doomsday, but I do believe in the truth. So in terms of what we know, what could be the long-term ramifications of this thing that we have done to the human race genetically?
Well, this is the next big shoe to drop. This is the next, I think, big question that's going to be answered. I think we're sort of on the cusp of answering this question of just how dangerous are these products to us genetically. Initially, before the whole DNA contamination issue was even discovered, people had concerns about the possibility of the mRNA reverse, transcribing and integrating into our genome. And that was shown that could actually happen. Now, it was only shown in a lab, in a petri dish, and it was never proven in a live organism. So, but that risk was already there to begin with. And I remember, seeing a paper that came out about it, talking about, that they did it in some, I think liver cancer cells, and they were able to actually integrate that mRNA into the DNA through a sort of a complicated process.
That was a Swedish study, correct?
Yeah, so that definitely was a risk to begin with. Now, once the DNA contamination was discovered, that opened a whole can of worms because this DNA contamination is problematic because now you're introducing not just mRNA, which everyone claimed, no, it can't integrate into the genome, it can't even get into the nucleus, and so there's no genetic risk. Well, now you're introducing foreign DNA in every single vaccine vial that's been discovered. Every single vial has billions of copies of these DNA plasmids that have the spike protein sequence in them and other sequences like the SV40, simian virus 40 sequence, a promoter sequence as well. And these billions of copies of foreign DNA are being injected into people. And now you've got a situation where we're actually injecting a contaminated genetic product into people with DNA, foreign DNA, that can integrate much more easily into our DNA. and it can integrate in various places. It can knock out, tumor suppressor genes, for example, so that could account for some of the cancers, turbo cancers that we're seeing. But there's also long-term risk where if these integration events are happening and we are actually integrating spike protein DNA into our genome, that could potentially be passed down to the next generations. And so, babies, if they receive this, DNA with this integrated sequence in it, well, they now might be producing the spike protein, and it could be causing damages, as soon as they're born. And I think this is the next area that is going to be. I know the research is already being done. In fact, I actually saw a Twitter post yesterday or this morning by Philip Buchholz, cancer geneticist who confirmed the DNA contamination, University of South Carolina. And he put out a call on Twitter, and he said, listen, send me your samples, and I will test them for integration of this DNA contamination with the spike protein and see if a vaccinated person has actually been genetically impacted by these vaccines. So this work is being done. I think it's a matter of months. It's only a matter of months before we discover whether this is happening and to what extent it's happening, and to what extent have we genetically damaged the population. It might be one of these things, random things, that some people will have it, some people won't. But I think that's the next big scandal to come. And I think, we're going to see those results in a matter of months. I think it's going to be a huge scandal. If DNA integration is proven, that means we are damaging people genetically. And I mean, if that doesn't get, these things taken off the market, I don't know what will. But I think it's going to cause a huge outcry, and it's going to be a huge scandal.
Oh, my goodness. So I was mentioning the vaccine injured before. Through this work I've been doing, I've come in contact with the vaccine injured, many of whom I consider my friends at this point. And I always keep them in mind when I come on the air to discuss these matters, because there are large numbers of people who have been affected by these injections in a way that has been ravenous. I mean, we had Danielle Baker on Twitter as the coerced nurse. She lives in physical agony. I know a lot of people who are in a lot of pain on a daily basis since they've received these injections. Have you been involved with any support groups in terms of trying to find some help, trying to discover some methods of recovery for the vast number of vaccine injured? Is there any progress on that front, to your knowledge?
I'm in touch with a lot of vaccine injured people, hundreds of vaccine injured people. They're trying different things. I'm working with Dr. Peter McCullough, at the Wellness Company. We have some, products for the spike to try to break down the spike protein that we're looking at. Some people have success with it. My approach to detoxing from these things, or at least trying to detox and minimize the damage from the spike protein, is you have to approach it from multiple angles and in a very broad way. It's not something that's going to be helped with one supplement or one nutraceutical. You have to approach it from multiple areas. And one of the thing I always start with is that doesn't require any supplement and anyone can do is fasting, a 3 to 5 day water fast. To try to get your body into a state of, ketosis and autophagy, kick in the process of autophagy where your body actually starts to clear out damaged cells. And it does it because your body realizes that you're starving, that you might die. Maybe you're stuck somewhere, out. The body doesn't know, right? All the body knows is that you're starving, you might die. So the body starts to give you survival advantages. Yeah. And one of these survival advantages is trying to clear a lot of the damaged cells cells that have been damaged by the spike protein, immune cells that have been damaged or made non-functional by the spike protein. The body starts to clear all of those, and then it starts to actually produce stem cells and starts to send those stem cells to different areas of the body where you might need them. And this is something that anybody can do. Now, it's not the most pleasant thing to fast with water only for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, but it's something that has helped a lot of people. This is a new area that research is being done in, and this is one of the approaches. Another approach is taking some enzymes to break down the spike protein, things like nattokinase, bromelain. These are derived from nattokinase is from soybeans, fermented soybeans. Bromelain is from the pineapple plant. Lumbrokinase, serrapeptase. These are other enzymes that people have tried. Break down the spike protein, or try to take things that block the spike protein, bind to it, and try to prevent it from doing damage. Things like ivermectin. Ivermectin binds the spike protein and has helped a lot of vaccine-injured people. Quercetin, pine needle tea, dandelion root, black seed, Nigella sativa, Artemisia annua. There are a number of these natural approaches that you can take to try to reduce the damage. Now, detractors have come online and said, well, you can't detox from the spike protein. Once you've been injected, you're damaged forever. And I find that's a very defeatist approach, because to just kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I've been injected and now there's nothing I can do about the damage. I don't think that's true, and I don't like that approach. I think you have to be proactive. I think you have to attack this thing, try to tackle it. Because if you do nothing, what happens is you've got blood clotting going on. So sooner or later, you're going to throw a big blood clot, have a stroke or a heart attack, or a pulmonary embolism. Your heart might be being damaged from myocarditis. This is still happening. And people who took their last shot maybe a year or even 2 years ago, they're still getting blood clots. They're still getting myocarditis. And they're still getting neurological injuries and cancer. Right. So, if you do nothing, then that is the destination for most COVID-vaccinated people.
Right. And that's another feature of what we were talking about in the first place, which is people getting injured, having these sudden acute injuries maybe 2 years or so after receiving their injection, and not making the connection with the injection when that very well may be the source of the injury. So those things don't even, they don't get recorded as vaccine injuries when they very well are.
What's fascinating, when I look at, because I study a lot of the literature that looks at vaccine injuries, and a lot of the literature just minimizes it, right?
Right.
But they also only look at in the first few weeks after taking the vaccine. They never look at 6 months later or 12 months later or 2 years later. No one is looking at it. No one is publishing those kinds of studies.
Right.
All the injuries they look at are in the first few days or first few weeks. And even when I did this article on psychosis, I was looking at, well, is anyone looking at mental health changes, a year down the road, 2 years down the road? No one is looking at it. No one is doing that research.
Right.
But there's definitely evidence of long-term effects of these vaccines.
Yeah.
Because the injuries and the sudden deaths continue to rise very steadily. And they have been since the vaccines were rolled out at the end of 2020. And that shouldn't be happening because people have pretty much stopped taking the booster shots. I mean, the last booster shot, I think only 10% of people have taken the last booster shot, as opposed to, 80-85% taking the first 2 shots. So we shouldn't be seeing the injuries on the same scale, or we shouldn't be seeing the sudden deaths. And yet, they continue to rise at a very steady pace, and really haven't dropped off. So the people who are being injured now, and a lot of them, I can't find any evidence that they took a vaccine recently, and their last vaccine maybe was a year and a half ago. These people are still developing problems and are still dying suddenly.
Right. Well, I would love to take calls if we have time. Anyone who wants to call in and talk to the brilliant Dr. William Makis, please call 888-874-4888, 888-874-4888. Hopefully you have the number already stored in your phone. or committed to memory, even better. But if you'd like to talk to the brilliant Dr. William Makis, now is your chance. I just ask, please be organized with your question. Don't give us a grand philosophical statement. Let's maximize the time we have with this brilliant medical professional. And let me ask you, Doctor, in terms of something I heard you speak about in an interview recently, the injury to athletes. Now, I, for one, have noticed an unusual amount of medical cases pertaining to various athletes. I mean, again, anecdotally, they love to be dismissive of anything anecdotal, but it seems perfectly clear to me there's something wrong. We had, for the first ever Monday Night Football game, actually not Monday Night Football game, I believe professional NFL game that was inconclusive. The game didn't end. It was a draw, or it was a game. It was a no contest, basically, not even a tie. It was an incomplete game because of a heart attack on the field in the first quarter. We have LeBron James's son, who had a heart attack again in a warm-up before he even started his college career. Now, bear in mind, LeBron James is the most durable NBA player possibly of all time. He's in his 20th season and still playing at an all-star level. So his son has a congenital heart condition. How did that escape all of the medical experts that have evaluated him up until this point? Seen a number of soccer players just collapse on the field. I know you said soccer is perhaps the most dangerous of the sports. It's just constant cardiovascular output without the starting and stopping of other sports. There's the cyclist who sat down, his name is Kyle. I can't remember his last name offhand. I think his first name is Kyle. Had an interview early on with Dr. John Campbell, just saying, I'm a vaccine-injured cyclist. My career is over because of these shots. I've heard a lot. There was a player named Goodwin in the NBA. He was going to be on the Atlanta Hawks originally. He said that he had debilitating back pain and then was diagnosed with blood clots almost immediately after his injection, thereby ending his NBA career before it started. When I went to look up Goodwin, I had to dig a little bit deeper because the first thing that came up was a Goodwin on the Baltimore Ravens football team, whose season, possibly career, has ended due to blood clots. So, anecdote after anecdote after anecdote. What can you say in terms of the compilation of these injuries? What can we say? I was in a Twitter space last night with someone just vehemently denying that this is unprecedented. They say, people have always died suddenly and athletes have always died and had heart attacks on the field. We just didn't record it. It doesn't seem plausible to me, but what's your response to people who are trying to deny the fact that athletes are being injured at alarming rates?
Well, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in professional athletes, of course, but you also see it in amateur athletes. Not, let's say, that the highest tier, but the lower tier, who do these sports for fun. You see it in high school athletes, of course. And it's just across the board. Anyone who's involved in athletics and this type of physical exertion, there seems to be an increase in these cardiac arrests or sudden unexplained collapses, and then of course the sudden deaths as well. We're battling an industry. Pharmaceutical industry or vaccine industry that is several $100 billion worth in terms of profits or revenues. I think between Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna, last year I think they've made over $200 billion in revenue, from these mRNA vaccines, and so there's a lot of money involved. Now I've seen some papers that have, try to sort of claim that there's no increase, and they cherry picked some data and they looked at some college athletes and so on, and they said, well, look, there's no increase and all that. A lot of this in a lot of these papers, there's a lot of statistical manipulation, and you can make you can come to any kind of conclusion once you're manipulating statistics. The bottom line is that I'm seeing it all around. I've compiled many of these cases. I've compiled hundreds of these cases, whether it's high school athletes or whether it's college or university athletes. Hundreds and hundreds of these cases of just sudden collapses, and unfortunately, this, and it seems to be ongoing. Again, it's this trend is not slowing down. It continues to happen. We continue to see these players collapsing, soccer players. And, in my investigation, soccer it really does seem to be the deadliest sport. And again, at all levels of play, from pro to amateur to, people just that play in their local clubs, to soccer coaches, it doesn't matter, or to young soccer players, it seems to be the most dangerous sport for these sudden cardiac incidents and sudden cardiac deaths. Running is another big one. And
well, bear in mind, like the NBA, they play, every other night, for example. In professional soccer, they have to take several days off between professional games because the players have literally run for miles in the previous game.
Yep. Yeah. And you do see it football is another big one. Football, I would say probably right after soccer, football would be, the next one. I talked about running, but that is usually in the context of a marathon. So we've seen a lot of marathoners collapse, and people doing triathlons.
Wow.
A lot of collapses there as well. What's interesting when it comes to basketball, baseball, you wonder how many of these players have actually had the real shots.
Yeah, I wonder about that as well. Yeah, I've thought that exactly.
Right, and so because it seems to be happening, like even in football, I noticed it seems to be happening mostly to retired players.
Yeah.
Players who are already retired, but maybe, they're still obviously, a lot of them are very athletic and continue to be, in great physical shape and so on, but it's the retired players that are collapsing.
Look at Deion Sanders, multiple NFL champion, two-sport athlete, an all-star in baseball and football, phenomenal athlete, has had multiple toes amputated all of a sudden.
Yes.
But actually, we do have a call on the line, and we're running out of time.
Okay.
So I would love to hear from Ann in New Jersey. Are you on the air, Ann? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. What are your thoughts? Could you...
Thank you for your program, and I love listening, and your guests are great, and thank you for being here.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. A lot of people, when these injections were first pushed out, chose to have the first dose and then opted out of subsequent ones. Have any of them been tested to see if years later they're still producing these proteins?
Good question. Dr. Makis, what do you say?
So very little testing has been done. There are a few labs that are trying to test for either spike protein levels or antibodies to spike protein levels. I can tell you that I have heard of cases, and this is just anecdotally, but I have heard of cases where people are producing spike protein, and this is like 2 years after their last vaccine dose, and they're still producing high levels of spike protein. So, again, this is just anecdotally. A lot more work needs to be done on this, but there is, there's starting to be some evidence that this for some people, this is a long-term problem, and it shouldn't be happening because if the mRNA is eventually degraded, then people shouldn't be producing the spike protein 2 years later, but it is happening in some people. So, and that's where you start to wonder, okay, well, did they have an integration event into their genome, and now they're going to be producing spike protein forever.
Wow.
And
it would be interesting to see if anybody who's done these protocols at a lot of different doctors, including the one that you gave earlier, if somebody's implemented those after having a shot or two, do they produce? Like, has anybody been tested on that level and say, oh, okay,
yes.
I know what's going on. I don't want that in me. I've done something. Am I okay now?
Yes, so work is being done on that as well. Again, some of this work is being done by Dr. Peter McCullough, for example. We've had individuals I should say, he's had individuals who started taking nattokinase, for example, that breaks down the spike protein, and he has seen their D-dimers levels drop, for example, right? So the D-dimer is a blood test that you do that is indicative of blood clots that are forming inside your body. And if you have high D-dimers, that means you've got a lot of clotting activity. And then, they take the nattokinase, which is supposed to break down the spike protein, and you see those levels drop sometimes back down to normal. And so, when I talk about these natural products like nattokinase or ivermectin or quercetin or pine needle or so on, we're not just sort of guessing. We're not just, taking something out of the air. There is work being done, with actually testing people to see, are they responding to these treatments? Are their spike protein levels going down? Are there, clotting factors going down?
Right.
And so there is evidence that some of these people are truly being helped by these products. Now, again, a lot of work needs to be done on this. And ultimately, what I would love to see, and I think this is one of these big areas where whatever company comes out with a simple test to test for the spike protein in the blood is going to do extremely well, because we need testing.
Yeah.
We need to know who is still producing spike protein years later.
We do.
And that, if they have circulating spike protein, well, it's probably damaging their heart. It's probably causing blood clots, and they're probably at high risk of sudden death.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, Dr. Makis.
Yeah.
You are a store of knowledge. We hit the 2:00 mark, and I can't be rude to the next show. But thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Dr. Makis, for being here. I commend you for your commitment, and thank you so much for all that you're doing for the medical freedom movement and for humanity.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And yeah, everyone, please tune in next week. We have another great guest lined up. We have a bunch of great guests lined up. The Bassline is a hot ticket at this point, so please spread the word. Check out my Substack. Buy a song today to support this program. JeremiahHosea.com, JeremiahHosea.com. And everyone have a beautiful weekend. Thank you.